Twitter turns 10. For a decade, it has revolutionized the way we communicate, but in a saturated market, how will Twitter compete? And is it still relevant? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. 140 characters is all it takes. And within seconds, your thoughts on everything from the weather to global events get seen by millions around the world. It's been 10 years since Twitter chirped its way onto the social networking scene. And in that relatively short time, it has established its significance. It's used by world leaders and celebrities alike and has also been cited as a catalyst for political change. But it's losing users and fewer people are joining it. So are Twitter's best days behind it? Al Jazeera's Tariq Basley has more.
It may not be a force of nature, but over the last 10 years, the Twitter bird has become a force online. Today, 320 million people use Twitter every month, pushing out around 6,000 tweets every second. That's about 500 million tweets every day. The trouble is, these figures appear to have stalled. Twitter's share price, it hit $69 after it went public. Now it's sitting at around $17. And Twitter's believed to be struggling to attract new users as arch rivals Facebook and Google become increasingly dominant. At its launch, Twitter was heralded as a new and revolutionary way to communicate. During the Arab Spring 5 years ago, it was widely used to help protesters organise. But since then, it's been used to launch often vicious personal attacks.
It has become a space where people also experience really challenging personal invasion of what is for many a workspace by people who have particular sort of one-sided interests.
If an account is being creepy or obnoxious, use block.
Twitter was criticised for responding too slowly to the online harassment. It has set up a reporting system, but for some, the public platform is too risky.
We all have heard the stories where people have been burned by tweets that were misconstrued or tweets they said in the spur of the moment. So I think giving them more control for individual tweets might get people back to the platform.
Twitter's also struggled to earn the kind of money Google and Facebook are making online. Over 10 years, it's lost more than $2 billion, prompting increasing moves to sell advertising on the platform. To win over more users, Twitter has been making changes, including last year's launch of its live video streaming site Periscope. Users may be taking more care about how and what they tweet, but for many, its appeal remains as it's always been: the possibility to connect and communicate in real time with an unprecedented number of people. Tariq Basley, Al Jazeera.
So as we heard from Tariq there, Twitter operates in a competitive market. It has something in the region of 320 million active monthly users, far behind market heavyweight Facebook, which has 1.5 billion users every month. The problem for Twitter and others is that Facebook also owns WhatsApp, the instant messaging app, which recently topped more than 1 billion users, as well as Instagram with its 400 million monthly users. Other social platforms, including Google+, YouTube, LinkedIn and Tumblr, all rival or exceed Twitter's user base. Well, time now to get the thoughts of our guests on today's Inside Story. In Zurich, we have David Garcia, a senior researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology and computational social scientist. In Houston, Madeline Sklar, Twitter marketing strategist. And in the Swedish city of Malmö, Aral Balkan, digital activist and chief lead designer at the social enterprise Ind.ie. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being on Inside Story. Now, before we get into the issues, I just want to get your quick thoughts on Twitter 10 years on. Starting with you, Aral. You've been on Twitter since the very beginning. So tell me, are you excited about Twitter today as you were 10 years ago?
No, I'm not. Twitter has changed considerably within that time. I think if we had been less naive, we would have recognized that this is the only path Twitter could have gone down, having been funded by venture capital. and having the business model that it has. But when it first began, it had potential, unlike anything else, to be a neural network for the planet. It was and still is truly revolutionary. It's just quite sad that that potential is tied to a very toxic business model of farming people.
Madeline, your thoughts? I mean, we all got the post today from Twitter thanking users for making history and for laughing together every day. And I know that you share that excitement and optimism about Twitter. Tell us why.
I do, because it's an amazing platform to connect with people. It's a place we go to for real-time breaking news. I mean, even back in 2008, when a U.S. protester in Egypt got put in jail, he tweeted, arrested, and everybody found out, everybody knew about it because of the power of Twitter. So here we are all these years later. It's still an amazing platform for connecting. I can connect with colleagues, I can connect with people that help me in business, but I could also connect with influencers like, say, Gary Vaynerchuk or Mark Cuban. That's something you can't do with other platforms like Instagram or LinkedIn.
But Madeline, what do you say to people like Aral who say that Twitter has lost its original identity to become like other networking sites like Facebook? And does it need to lose its identity, you think?
I don't really think it's lost its identity. Sure, it's gone through a lot of changes, especially in the past year. When these changes first come about, everybody gets so worked up and so like, oh, this is so negative, this is going to lose the coolness of Twitter. But then we really quickly see that these changes are a plus, that they really do help. Yet a platform like Twitter, it's been around for 10 years. I don't see it losing what it started out to be as a great platform for connecting people.
Okay, let's bring in David now in Zurich. David, when Twitter filed their initial public offering in 2013, they claimed to have 500 million tweets a day, 332 million active users, I should say. And today, though, they don't make that number readily available. From a research standpoint, David, where is Twitter today? Is it still the global phenomenon that it was just a few years ago?
I would say that from a research standpoint, it's true that Twitter fits into a particular niche of communication. It's not a universal social network in which everyone is talking about anything in any circumstance. People are aware that it's public and that they're basically making a standpoint when they're saying something in Twitter. So I would say that if we see some sort of contraction in the user base or a bit more opacity, it's because this claim that we can just simply connect to anyone and talk about anything through Twitter might not be the case anymore. People have other channels to talk about other things. So of course, we know that everything we see in Twitter is not universal, it's just a part of human communication.
What's the extent, David, today of Twitter's problems? I mean, have they made any profits at all since they went public in 2013?
Sure. The research community has learned a lot in the last few years, and there are impressive data analysis methods and ways to process all the information that Twitter, for example, has. So I would say that it's not that they are exactly at the same point as before, even if the user base is not that big or the activity is not that strong. But anyone, any social networking site can make much better informed decisions nowadays than years ago. So comparing nowadays with 10 years ago, I would say that at least they have the machinery to make better design decisions or generalize marketing decisions about what to do with Twitter.
Aral in Malmo, what do you think went wrong for Twitter? Because it has gone wrong. It's not the same as, I think we all agree, it's not the same networking site that it was 10 years ago. What didn't work out for them, you think?
Well, I don't think anything went wrong for them particularly. It was a natural progression of their business model. So it really has gone in the only direction that it could have gone, given that they had venture capital, they had millions in venture capital, they had investors, and they had to give those investors their money back, and they have shareholders now. So the real issue is with this business model that requires people's personal data, that isn't a tool for people, because we don't pay for Twitter, right? We don't pay for Twitter. It's not a product that we buy. So, but they make a lot of money. So how do they make money? They do it by selling us or monetizing us. And that's the real problem. That's what has led to the recent decisions that Twitter has taken. It's not a mistake. It's not an error. It is a core characteristic of this business model. And the problem is the business model here.
Madeline, what do you respond to that? Aral says the issue for Twitter today is its business model.
Well, Twitter is going to have to change with the times. I mean, what it was 10 years ago, it does change. It does have to, go to, how the people want to use it. And, we look at Facebook as a model of, well, people like it to be used a certain way. They go there to see, to get their, to get news, to get information on their friends, to see what their family's up to. Twitter is, trying to take some of that, for instance, last year they made a change, or actually it was this year they made a change with the chronological order to become now an algorithmic order of your timeline. Mm-hmm. So they're looking at ways other platforms are using it to have it work for people, and how do we make it also fit in today versus what it was 10 years ago. So something as simple as changing the timeline.
But Madeline, isn't the problem for Twitter today that go on,
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's not in the interest of the people who are using it. There's nothing wrong with the chronological timeline. The reason they're moving to an algorithmic timeline is so that they can have curatorial control, so that they can better monetize the information that's on there and your attention. So when Twitter improves its product in that way, it's like the massage that we give to Kobe beef. It's not in the interests of the cow. It's to make the cow a better product.
I do like that analogy.
That's one way of looking at it. Yes, one way of looking at it for sure. I'm looking at it from what do the people want, how do they want to use it, and we know that everybody looks at Facebook for how to best use social media, how are we going to market using social media. I was a big fan of Twitter having the timeline be chronological. We like that unfiltered timeline, but with these changes, we're now seeing it's not a bad thing. And so, yeah, you're looking at one way, but I'm looking at it for the marketers.
Let's talk about the people who use Twitter now. And I want to bring in David in Zurich. David, a majority of the people who are active on Twitter today are journalists, are stars, people who want to put out a certain message and so on. So there's only a small number of people who want to engage in this manner. Do you think this is also the problem for Twitter today, that it's not caught up with mainstream media like Facebook, like the other social networking sites?
I wouldn't say that doesn't need to be a problem. So, of course, it could be if Twitter just wanted to become a news central node on the internet. Mm-hmm. But since users have different motivations, they don't want only to receive information, but also to be heard. I think it can work. This combination of motivations might be interesting. I have to say that in the question between the algorithmic interface and the use of privacy, we have kind of a dichotomy between costs and benefits. So benefits is basically the information that you receive or the attention that you receive, and the cost is not a monetary cost, but you have costs in terms of risks, for example, risk about your privacy. So I have to say that they are kind of two independent aspects. They don't really cancel each other. People kind of have a trade-off between this implicit cost and these benefits that they get, and probably the virtue is in the balance between both.
Okay. I want to get your view. Let's leave the algorithms on the side for a bit. And Aral, I want to talk to you about the people who use Twitter, the journalists and so on, people who have a certain message again. And this is probably why a lot of people say that Twitter hasn't reached the mainstream success of other social media rivals like Facebook. Do you see the use of Twitter? What do you see today as being precisely the use of Twitter is my question.
There are probably as many uses of Twitter as there are people who use Twitter. I think one of the disconnects that you heard earlier is because I was approaching it from the perspective of someone who uses Twitter versus someone who is a marketer that actually buys the information about people who use Twitter. And of course, journalists use it. And we see it as a means of freedom of expression. I mean, in the opening, we heard how it played a part in the Arab Spring. But today, for example, in Turkey, if someone sent out a tweet that was insulting to the president, the Turkish government could ask Twitter to take that off, and Twitter would say yes. Initially they fought this, but now The Turkish government, for example, has a direct line to Twitter. So I think there's a real danger in entrusting our civil liberties in multinational corporations. That's not their duty. That's not their job.
Okay, well, let's talk about the social impact now and the social implications. And Twitter released a video on Monday to celebrate its anniversary, and it featured news-making tweets from the last 10 years, including those about Malala Yousafzai winning the Nobel Peace Prize, the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States, Nelson Mandela's death, of course, and the Boston Marathon bombings. But these past 10 years have also been littered with controversial moments on Twitter. You all remember former public relations executive Justine Sacco, who was fired after tweeting a joke about getting AIDS before flying to South Africa. She was also harassed for months after the incident and had trouble finding another job. English comedian Stephen Fry quit the social media platform in February, calling it a stalking ground for the sanctimoniously self-righteous. That was after he received a barrage of angry tweets over a joke he made at the BAFTA Awards. And now all these celebrities have quit Twitter at some point, often because of alleged harassment on the site. Madeline in Houston, Twitter used to be fun. When it started, it was fun. It was about sharing jokes and so on. What happened? Why is it that 10 years on, I mean, we hear stories about people losing their jobs over a tweet they posted?
Personally, I think Twitter is still fun. I believe it's what you make of it, just like any other social media site. When it comes to Twitter, it's all about being real and being transparent. And I can totally see how celebrities can run into issues because they're putting themselves out there, which, 10 or 20 years ago,
but it's not just celebrities, though.
I
mean, in the case of Justine Sacco, for instance, she wasn't a celebrity. She was just, a random civilian who just tweeted about something.
She made a big mistake.
Did she?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a great example of we're listening. I mean, people are listening on Twitter. She thought she could post something like that and nobody would pay attention, but people do pay attention. They're smarter than we think on Twitter. They are watching what people talk about. One of the first things I teach about Twitter is to listen. I always tell people I work with, listen to the conversations. In her case, that's exactly what people were doing.
Aral Balkan, I want to hear your thoughts on this, on the bullying that goes on Twitter. People losing their jobs over, a tweet, or their life changing because of something they posted.
Well, again, let's think about how Twitter makes money. Twitter makes money the more people use it. Controversy is something that leads to more tweets. More tweets lead to more money for Twitter. So is there a reason why Twitter was designed in a way to make it possible to have this sort of mob rule or mob response to things? Yes. What would a social network look like if it wasn't designed for celebrity culture, if it wasn't designed for the attention economy, but it was simply designed to, for example, keep you in touch with your friends and your family and the people you care about? Would that have the same problems? Perhaps not. What if it didn't have a big center like Twitter does? Twitter Incorporated curates the tweets, right? They're responsible for the bullying. What if it didn't have that? What if we all had our little tiny social networks, all of our own? Those are alternatives that we could look into exploring. Twitter has the problems that it has because it's built on the business model that it's built on. When there's controversy, when people, when something blows up and someone loses their job, that drives more people to use Twitter, at least initially. It might drive people away from it as well. But for that quarter, maybe, the usage goes up. They make more money. They show more ads. So there's a real conflict of interests here, and even between their long-term interests and the short-term interests.
A conflict of interest, you say, but am I naive in thinking that this happens more often on Twitter than on Facebook, for instance?
Yeah, but it's geared for controversy. I mean, even the character limit, the very fact that it's 140 characters, it's very hard to express nuance in 140 characters. I know from my own tweets, I over 10 years of tweeting, I can now make a very succinct statement, but that statement can rub people up the wrong way. And perhaps if I had 2-3 times the space to express myself, then there would be nuance in there that wouldn't lead to a conflict. Yeah. And maybe that's one step they can take.
David, what does research? David in Zurich, what does research show about this precisely? About the social impact of Twitter versus other networking sites like Facebook?
So for the case of Twitter, we see that this emergence of polarization or controversy is clearly a consequence of its design. I wouldn't say that it's by design, but it's clearly that the filtering mechanisms that show us information that we agree with, like this non-filter bubble, creates a local space of agreement that then once you break that bubble and you go out in the real world, you find reality hitting you on the face and getting fired because of what you were saying with your friends. Mm-hmm. So I have to say that it simply emerges from the nature of Twitter, and if we don't see it in other networks, it's because they're not so interconnected. For example, creating a friendship link on Facebook is something more expensive. You need to make a request and the other person has to accept. Mm-hmm. But in Twitter, you can just follow anyone, basically. And this creates this kind of reactivity that creates basically firestorms or simply flaming in a very frequent basis.
Mm. Madeleine, a lot of people use the word addiction to describe their relationship with Twitter. Why do you think that is?
Well, because, you start using it and you see that there's a lot of benefit to it. And because of that, it's hard to stop using it once you get started. It's just like being addicted to your iPhone or to Facebook. With social media, if you see the power of it, you see what you can get out of it, what you can do with it. There's so much.
What do you respond to those who say yes?
What
do you respond, Madeleine, to people who say yes, Twitter feels authentic and spontaneous and heartfelt, but that also makes it attractive to propaganda?
Right. Well, there's that fine line to walk, and that's where it can be very, very challenging. I mean, I look at it in a positive light. I look at all the good things I get out of it. And with most people I work with, they talk about what they get out of it that's positive. Okay. They don't really look at the negative aspects of it.
All right, well, let me get your final thoughts now on what the future looks like for Twitter, starting with you, Aral, in Malmo. I mean, there's no denying, of course, that Twitter has had a profound impact on society. It's changed the way we communicate and so on. So my question is, is what we're seeing now the beginning of the end of Twitter, or this just merely entering a new phase, you would say?
Well, it's probably closer to the truth to say it's entering a new phase, but it is definitely not what it could have been. Mm-hmm. And that's the real danger with this business model of people farming, that we're building very useful things. No one will deny how useful Twitter is or Google is or Facebook is, but we're tying them to a very toxic business model that farms people. You mentioned addiction earlier. Mm-hmm. This is exactly what it's about. There is a best-selling book in Silicon Valley called Hooked, and the subtitle is How to Build Addictive Experiences. So these don't just happen by mistake. We are designing these addictive experiences so that we can farm people better. That's the core business model that we need to tackle and change if we want to fix things. It's not just a problem with Twitter. It's a problem with Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, and all of these Silicon Valley products.
Okay.
We need to change that.
Okay, David, you have the final thought on this show today. What do you see the future looking like for Twitter? Is it the beginning of the decline of this social networking site, or do they still have a few years in them, you think?
I don't think it's necessarily the beginning of a decline. It can be also this new stage or new life for Twitter. I have to say that things are difficult to predict in the sense that we are learning a lot from all these social media sites and from the all new phenomena that we see online. So what I can say is that now things are tractable. Things can be measured. We can tell who talks to whom, about what, and we can see this in a gigantic perspective. So in a sense, I would say that even if we cannot really predict what's going to happen to Twitter, we are going to be able to understand what is happening to Twitter. And in that sense, it makes me feel a bit more positive. Oh. So, of course, the motivations and the business models are something else, but the fact that it can be traced and it can be understood to some extent is something that makes me believe that it will survive to a longer run.
Okay, we'll leave it on that positive note then. Thank you so much for being with us on Inside Story. David Garcia, Madeleine Sklar, and Aral Balkan. Thank you all for being on Inside Story. And you can see this program again, of course, anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.